everyone, and thank you so much for showing up. Today we'll be presenting the topic recruitment and selection, which is an essential part of hiring, maintaining workforce, and organizational strategy. There are a few agendas that we have addressed. The first one is to understand and reflect on what recruitment and selection is and how it is an integral part of human resources planning. This is followed by introducing effective measures that help us informing organizational strategy in terms of recruiting and hiring in a way that we are actually maintaining the productivity of the organization. We're also going to be talking about utilizing various legal compliances that all of us have to keep in mind, being HR professionals, and the fact that we need to accomplish employment equity, diversity, and inclusion as a part of our workforce and create a strategy of recruiting and selection around the same. We also want to discuss about the fact that as HR professionals, we would always be providing a fair and unbiased selection process for each and every candidate. We're also going to be linking all of the topics to our real-world implications about how HR planning in terms of recruitment and selection is done globally. We are also going to be understanding various tools and strategies and metrics that we use for human resources planning. Elaborating on the same, a brief summary of our report specifies and understands recruitment and selection while defining effective recruitment and selection and various strategies to implement that across the world, eliminating intentional and unintentional bias from the process, which is adapting to a scientific method of recruiting instead of going for a gut selection. Use of metrics such as selection ratio, yield ratio to analyze data and hiring, to also reflect on how many positions are available, how many candidates are we screening, and how many candidates are we actually hiring. Addressing the strength and weaknesses of the entire process. The strengths would be making informed hiring decisions, creating organizational fit strategies and candidates, globally connecting. So since globalization has already welcomed a huge floor for us to recruit candidates in terms of using social media, LinkedIn, and a lot more, we're also going to be talking and taking it as strengths of HR planning when it comes to the global world. We will also be talking about some technological implications and how a success-based decision is driven. A few weaknesses about the entire process is sometimes, even though we tend to give the best decision out there, we do have some personal bias integrated. Then the entire process is time consuming, which is the entire purpose of addressing recruitment and selection in HR planning in order to make it less cost effective and less time consuming. On top of that, we will be discussing reliable and valid methods of recruitment and selection based on recruitment tests, assessment centers, and everything being reliable and valid. When we talk about the selection process, it is comprised of 7 sections, followed by a hiring decision, a supervisor or a team interview, which can also be a panel interview, a preliminary selection, which is done right before getting hired, a background investigation, employment testing, initial interview, which is followed by completion of application by following all of these steps. And in the entire presentation, we're going to be talking around the same areas.
So now we're going to talk about the staffing process. So the staffing process is made up of 2 main sections, recruitment and selection. So recruitment can be defined as the strategic effort that takes place when a pool of candidates is generated. In this section, candidates must be attracted to the position by having an interest. Selection, on the other hand, is used after recruitment takes place to help minimize the pool of applicants. This is done based on the applicant's candidates' knowledge, skills, abilities, and experience for the position. Then we have the recruitment process. This process takes place before selection occurs to ensure the pool of candidates can be generated. So the first step is planning for staffing needs, which can be seen from 2 viewpoints: to fill a vacant spot, or on the other hand, to scan the environment for future talent. Then the next step in the process is to identify the current and future labor needs. So once the organization identifies that there is a need for staffing, they must get approval from management to ensure this process can be start in the process. Then the third step would be to create a job advertisement from the job description that would highlight the skills and responsibilities of the position. It is crucial that the job description of the position is accurate and up to date to ensure the job description will attract the most qualified candidates. Next, we have to determine which recruitment method and route we will use in our recruitment process. This step in the process is dependent on each organization and each policy. Many companies have specific policies that dictate how they want to handle vacancies in the company and staffing, impacting the method that will be used. Then lastly, we have generate a pool of candidates for the position. This step is dependent on the effectiveness of the selection and recruitment methods in relation to what is needed for the organization and the position. So then we have recruitment methods, and this is used in the recruitment process depending on two factors that need to be answered, which is the goal to hire, replace, or promote employees from within the organization, or is the objective to widen the search for candidates by going outside of the company? Once these questions have been answered, we can start to make a decision based on internal methods or external methods. Some examples of internal methods include job postings being used, skills inventory taking place, or replacement charts. And then external methods include using corporate websites or job boards or social networking sites like LinkedIn or job fairs.
So I'm going to be discussing the selection process. Sorry, I just have to make sure I'm there. So to begin, we usually begin with these are out of order, that's okay. With a preliminary applicant screening. So this involves reviewing resumes and other applications of candidates to determine if they meet the minimum qualifications for a job. So this can be done either over the phone, or it can be done via an ATS scanner, which just matches the candidate's resume with a pre-established job description. And then we have employment testing, which involves administering assessments to determine knowledge, skills, and abilities of the candidates. This might include things like an aptitude test, personality test, or other skill assessments. And then we move on to interviewing, which involves a meeting with the candidate to determine their suitability for the job, where behavioral and cognitive tests are sometimes administered. Interviews may be conducted by more than one individuals, including HR representatives and department managers. And lastly, we have background and reference checking. This involves verifying candidates' education, work history, and references to ensure that the information is provided by the candidate is accurate. And then this may also involve checking criminal records and conducting credit checks if necessary. The overall goal of the selection process is to identify the best candidate for the position who has the necessary qualifications, skills, and experience to help the organization grow and also perform the job effectively. The selection process helps organizations ensure that they're making informed hiring decisions and using the best of their resources. Okay, so to begin, we have some recruitment and selection metrics. So these ratios and measurement metrics are vital within the recruiting process because they allow us to audit our processes and make improvements where needed. For example, we could use quality of hires to measure new hires' performance and the overall impact within the company, specifically regarding job performance, fit, and retention. This is an important metric for HR personnel to utilize because it allows us to see the effectiveness of our selection and recruiting process. Next, we have time to fill. This metric measures the amount of time an organization takes to fill a position from the time that the job opens to the time that the new candidate would start. This metric allows us to investigate and critique our overall recruitment process, including the sourcing of candidates and the interviewing and hiring process. Obviously, a shorter time to fill is preferable because it allows us to fill the position faster and results in us spending less money on the recruitment process. Next, we have a selection ratio. This selection ratio is typically calculated by dividing the number of new hires by the number of total applicants, and this allows us to identify areas of improvement. The goal of tracking this ratio is to optimize the use of resources and improve the quality of hires. Next, we have a yield ratio. Yield ratio typically measures the number of applicants who were called in for an interview and that were found through one same source. So, for example, if you had candidates apply from LinkedIn and Indeed and etc., this would allow us to see who was coming from where, and then this would allow us to see market trends. It would allow us to gauge competitiveness with other businesses, and also allow us to basically sell its brand so that we could recruit candidates more efficiently. And next we have the recruiting cost. The recruiting cost rate, and this metric is utilized to measure the cost of the recruiting process. This will include expenses such as advertising, recruiter salaries, screening, and other costs associated with hiring candidates. The goal of tracking this is to optimize future recruitment costs and streamline finances. Okay, so next we have decision-making models or calculating predictor scores. So here we have the unit weighting model. As you can see across the top, we have a WAV, a test, an interview, a reference check, and then sometimes you can include the total at the end, but you don't need to use it for all of the predictor scores that you're looking for. And then just at the bottom, we have the maximum scores that are allotted for each test, and then we have a regression for if we wanted to use a regression model, and then the cutoff score. So to begin, if we wanted to use this unit weighting model, we must assign the weights and to reflect the most important attributes of the selection process. So in this situation, that would be the interview, and it is worth 50 points. And after collecting these scores using the unit weighting model, we would just add them together, and then the individual with the highest score would be chosen. So for you guys, who would you choose out of this? Three. Candidate 3? Yeah. And then we also have the multiple cutoff model. So to use the multiple cutoff scores, we compare each candidate to the cutoff score. So that's the score here. And if an individual was to meet or exceed, they would pass. But if they were to attain like below the minimum score, they would be rejected from the process because they didn't meet the minimum cutoff. If these calculations can act as, every single candidate is either rejected or passed, then we can apply a different selection method to make the best choice. Statistical decision-making models are extremely important to implement within our recruiting process because they allow us to ensure that we're making valid decisions. These calculations, if need be, can be used as proof if an employee ever wanted to take us to tribunal because they feel that they were treated unfairly during the recruitment process, and they basically just act as documented proof. So in this situation, what would you guys choose to hire for your company? 2? Yeah, 2 is correct.
So I'll be discussing how the recruitment and selection process relates to the field of human resources. So recruitment and selection are usually the first thing that pops into someone's mind when they think of the human resource profession, but there's a lot more to the topic than simply hiring new talent. First, HR professionals need to ensure that hiring practices follow proper legislation, including Employment Equity Act, Human Rights, and Human Rights Act. HR professionals must ensure they are working for employment equity and diversity in the hiring practices. This can be done by making every attempt to attract members from protected groups, meaning women, Aboriginal people, visible minorities, and persons with disabilities. And this is done via diversity recruitment. Diversity recruitment recognizes that standard recruiting practices can create systemic barriers to the employment of protected groups and thereby perpetuates discrimination against these groups. Employers have the responsibility to remove any existing barriers in the recruitment practices that prevent fair access to the workplace. As well, the Ontario Human Rights Code lists protected groups that the employer is not legally allowed to consider protected grounds, that they're not allowed to consider during the recruitment selection process. HR professionals must be aware of how their recruitment selection practices could be discriminatory. As Brianne said with her metrics, the protected grounds are the protected grounds under the human rights codes. Having things written down is a great way to avoid any sort of legal action that way and to prove yourself. Next is the utilization of social networks for the recruitment selection process. There's many benefits to doing this. Job postings can reach more candidates than a standard print ad. It's inexpensive and very convenient. However, there are concerns with privacy and discrimination. As social networks recruiting becomes more common, HR professionals must be aware that utilizing these networks as a screening tool leaves an organization open to possible claims of discrimination. A candidate's social media profiles could reveal their sexual orientation, age, gender, religion, and any other protected grounds, and that is something that recruitment and HR professionals need to be aware of. Finally, the organization's recruitment strategy must align with the organization's business plan for it to be effective. For example, if a company wants to be a leader in producing a unique consumer product, it needs employees who are willing and creative to do that. Therefore, it's a recruitment. The recruitment efforts done by the company would focus on identifying people with the necessary skills to complete these jobs and have these abilities. HR professionals need to not only be aware of the organization's business plans and their goals, but understand it thoroughly and what roles, qualities, and abilities candidates need, and they would need in employees to achieve the organization's goals.
Okay, so I'll be discussing the real-world implications of recruitment and selection. So first we need to consider how recruitment and selection practices affect members of our society. So women, visible minorities, Aboriginal peoples, and peoples with disabilities are more likely to experience employment barriers if organizations are not committed to ensuring a diverse workforce. So for example, in the case of people with disabilities, if an employer is not willing to adjust the interview or employment testing process to accommodate them, they would not be able to participate in the process in the same way as people who do not have disabilities. Employment barriers for these groups obviously not only affects the members in these groups, but society as a whole, because eliminating employment barriers can contribute to a healthy economy. Next are the implications surrounding internet and social media recruiting. So as Brooke touched on, more and more recruiters are using candidates' social media profiles, looking at their profiles as a way of screening. So obviously this can reveal non-job related characteristics such as what the candidate looks like, what their interests are, religious views, political views, all that kind of stuff. So this can lead possibly to feelings of restricted freedom of expression, just because some people may feel like they need to make their profiles recruiter friendly in case they look at them and they worry that the information on the profile might be used against them. And candidates also need to be careful of what they post on their profiles. So anything that may be considered offensive would need to be removed just to increase their chances of getting an interview. And the exclusion of certain protected groups. So certain protected groups use the internet and social media less than others. So people with disabilities are an example. 2010 study found that whereas 85% of adults with disabilities access the internet, only 54% of adults with disabilities do. Another study found that Hispanics and African Americans use LinkedIn less frequently than any other group. So obviously relying too heavily on social media recruiting has an adverse impact on these groups, and they are therefore unable to participate fully in the recruitment process. And then lastly, we must consider how the recruitment and selection processes can affect a company's reputation. So a commitment to creating and maintaining a diverse workforce. So society forms opinions of organizations based on their recruitment and selection processes. So for example, organizations that are committed to creating and maintaining a diverse workforce will be viewed by customers and prospective employees much more positively than organizations that do not have this commitment, thereby resulting in customer loyalty and increased job seeker interest.
Okay, so does everybody know how Kahoot works? Okay, so go.
Put it on your phone, right?
Yeah, you
Is that
just
it?
go onto your computer or your phone and you type in Kahoot, and then it should just pop up with like a page where you have to put in a pin, and then once we put our pin up on the board, you can type it in, and then we're just gonna do like a little game of our presentation. So just give us 1 sec to get that up.
Yeah, so we wait for the game pin.
Oh, say that.
5735316.
Okay, so
Why not do
perfect.
that?
Already.
Oh, okay. It's ready.
You're not supposed to tell her the answer.
Can you guys see can you see it okay? Or do you
Yes.
need to get closer?
Do you wanna come here, come a little closer?
Go on, there's a better way.
Also, I think there's only 10 seconds to answer the question,
Yeah.
so you have to be quick. Ready?
It's good small, I think it's.
Yeah.
That's you?
Nice.
That's even a compliment of my last.
Nice. Good job, guys.
100%.
Well, Ceda's still winning. Nice.
Chris, I'm coming.
Multiple, it's along the top, multiple cutoff model uses cutoff scores to determine a pass
Pass
fail.
or fail.
Wow, you guys are all stars.
Well, you guys did a good job at
Yeah.
presenting, so that is why your colleagues are able to respond.
What is a con of using the internet for recruiting?
What's the?
Oh, that's,
Nice.
I was thinking that you have 3 competitors in the room. How come if I answer first, you're still up?
Because she answered the first one.
Okay,
so we
that's
did not
the
answer the
first
first
one,
one,
that's
she
the
answered.
problem.
So she
No,
doesn't see it.
no. You answered the first one. You didn't see it, so we don't.
Yeah,
The
they
first one is
didn't
off.
answer the first one, so she got the yes. So we should eliminate that first.
Yes. And it's Chris. Validity and reliability are not important in the recruitment and selection
Oh,
process.
that's.
Wow, you guys
Nice,
are
you guys
quick.
are quick. Oh, Ceda has a
We're
streak.
still, SK still reading well, yeah, just because of that one.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, last one.
That's one.
Double
Points,
points,
double
there we go,
points.
double
Select
points.
the recruitment ratio.
Oh, what?
Select the ratio that we use for recruiting. If we think back to accounting, we might be able to answer
Oh,
this
contribution.
question.
Contribution. Oh.
Somebody
lost.
No worries.
You did? You lost?
Let us see.
I might not.
Oh,
invite
so
Chris.
now we don't know who's gonna win. Third place?
Very good.
I had to think you saw the first question. Shame.
Thank you for the
Oh,
quiz.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Great engagement.
Thank you guys for
Really, really creative.